In 1870, a young man, only 31 years old, living in Cleveland, Ohio, quietly controlled around 4% of America's oil refining capacity. But within a single decade, that small foothold multiplied into near total dominance. By 1880, he commanded roughly 90% of U.S. refining. And by 1904, he oversaw more than 91% of oil production and 85% of all final sales. His name was John D Rockefeller, a man who did not merely build a company, but engineered a system, a blueprint for centralized control that still governs the world today. The corporate mechanisms he developed, the monopolistic tactics he perfected, and the organizational structures he pioneered did not disappear when Standard Oil was legally dismantled in 1911. Instead, they evolved, spread, and embedded themselves into the global economy. And now, in 2025, the very same model shapes your everyday life. The gasoline you fill your tank with, the pharmaceutical products you depend on, the tech platforms that track and influence your behavior, the food you buy, the banks that hold your money, virtually all of these operate using the Rockefeller formula: vertical control, horizontal consolidation, regulatory capture, and tax-sheltered foundations that quietly influence public policy. Rockefeller did not simply build an oil empire. He created an architecture of power, a method of concentrating wealth and control into the hands of a few. And because the system is a method, not a single company, it survives indefinitely. Every generation of corporations simply installs the same operating software. Today, companies like Amazon, Google, Pfizer, and JP Morgan Chase don't merely resemble Standard Oil, they follow its blueprint step by step. Control the entire supply chain vertically, eliminate rivals horizontally, influence or absorb the regulators, use philanthropy as a cloak of morality and legitimacy. And if a government forces you to break apart, ensure the separated pieces enrich you even more. Understanding how Rockefeller built this system, how he became the richest man in modern history, and how the breakup of Standard Oil only increased his wealth, is not simply an academic exercise. It is a matter of discernment survival in a world moving toward global centralization. The Bible warned us of a coming structure of world power, a system where no one can buy or sell without submission to centralized authority. Revelation 13:16-17. Rockefeller did not create that final system, but he created the economic logic that makes such a structure possible. As the world becomes increasingly interconnected and dependent on global supply chains, personal independence decreases. That is why believers today must use wisdom, acquire land in rural areas, drill wells, secure independent power sources, and reduce dependency on massive corporate networks. In a world heading toward a centralized global order, practical self-sufficiency is not merely wise, it's biblical stewardship. Rockefeller's world was the seed. Our world is the harvest. And the system he designed continues to shape the economic landscape you live in every single day.
By 1870, Rockefeller had formally established the Standard Oil Company of Ohio. What began as one modest refinery in Cleveland had grown into the largest refining operation in the world. Yet Rockefeller still controlled only about 4% of America's refining capacity. And for him, that was far from sufficient. So he initiated the next phase of his strategy: horizontal domination, removing every competitor until only his system remained. In 1872, Rockefeller launched what historians later called the Cleveland Massacre. Over a span of just 3 months, he approached every refinery owner in the city. His method was simple, but devastating. If they agreed to sell, he paid fair market value and often offered them managerial positions within his empire. If they declined, he unleashed a price war so severe that refusal became financial suicide. Rockefeller could sell kerosene at prices his rivals could never match because his vertical integration, his ownership of barrels, transportation, warehouses, and distribution allowed him to produce for far less than anyone else. Competitors who resisted were crushed under prices below their cost of production. One by one, nearly every refinery in the region fell. Out of 26 Cleveland refineries, Rockefeller acquired 25. In just a few months, his share of American refining capacity skyrocketed from 4% to 25%. This became the standard operating method: offer peace, but prepare for economic war. And this same strategy would later be used by monopolies across every major industry for the next century and a half. But Rockefeller's ambitions extended far beyond Cleveland. Throughout the 1870s, he expanded Standard Oil across the nation into New York, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Baltimore, and beyond, using the same tactics: secret shipping rebates, ruthless price cuts, and absorption of any rival who dared resist. By 1879, he controlled 90% of American refining. Not a corporation, a kingdom. Yet Rockefeller understood a critical truth. Monopolies face two threats. 1, they are illegal. 2, people despise them. Public outrage against Standard Oil was growing, and the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890 was specifically designed to dismantle powers like his. Rockefeller knew he needed a new structure, something that hid his control while expanding it. So in 1882, his lawyers pioneered a new invention: the corporate trust. Standard Oil of Ohio could not legally own companies in other states, but a trust-a-holding structure could. Under this system, dozens of independent companies were placed under a single board of trustees, controlled entirely by Rockefeller and his closest allies. This was the birth of the modern multinational corporation. Today's giants, Alphabet, Google, Meta, Berkshire Hathaway, Amazon Air, all descendants of this model. Central entity that owns many separate companies, each insulated from legal risk, yet quietly controlled by the same hand. It's a structure so effective that even when governments attempt to regulate or dismantle monopolies, the system simply rearranges itself and continues. And here is where the biblical perspective becomes striking. Revelation 13 describes a future global authority with centralized economic power, one that can determine who may buy or sell. Rockefeller's innovations were not the fulfillment of that prophecy, but they laid a technological and legal groundwork that makes such a system feasible. Today's digital conglomerates, data monopolies, and global supply chains function exactly as the trusted centralized power behind the illusion of decentralization. This is why wisdom is essential for believers. As these global systems grow more interconnected, dependence on them becomes more dangerous. Acquire rural property, have your own water supply, secure independent sources of power. Grow even a little of your own food. Every step away from dependency is a step toward freedom and resilience in an increasingly centralized world. Rockefeller built a system of consolidation. Our world is perfecting it. By the early 1900s, Rockefeller's dominance had become so complete that Standard Oil controlled 91% of all refining in the United States and 85% of all final oil sales. Rockefeller had become the wealthiest man on earth. His fortune, surpassing what today would amount to hundreds of billions of dollars. But public pressure mounted. Journalists like Ida Tarbell published scathing investigations exposing his hidden rebates, predatory pricing, and merciless destruction of competitors. Americans were outraged, politicians were cornered, and the Supreme Court finally intervened. In 1911, the court ruled Standard Oil an illegal monopoly and ordered it divided into 34 separate companies. On the surface, this appeared to be Rockefeller's downfall. The giant seemed shattered, but the reality was the opposite. Rockefeller owned significant shares in every single one of those 34 new companies. And immediately after the breakup, those companies, now free to compete, grew even more profitable. The combined value of all the pieces surpassed the original company's worth several times over. What the world saw as defeat, Rockefeller experienced as multiplication. Over time, many of those 34 separate companies reconsolidated. Standard Oil of New Jersey became Exxon. Standard Oil of New York became Mobil. Standard Oil of California became Chevron. Standard Oil of Indiana evolved into Amoco. Standard Oil of Ohio would later be absorbed into BP. The monopoly had not been destroyed, only reorganized. This is how the system works. It bends, but it never breaks. When confronted by regulation, it shapeshifts. When resisted, it adapts. When attacked, it decentralizes temporarily, only to reunify later under different names. The true legacy of Rockefeller is not Standard Oil. It's the operating method copied across industries. Big tech, big pharma, big banking, big agriculture, big media, all follow the same blueprint. Absorb, dominate, reorganize, and expand. And this is where the biblical worldview becomes alarmingly relevant. Scripture tells us that in the final age, power will be given to the beast over every tribe, people, language, and nation. Revelation 13-7. An economic system so centralized that no one can buy or sell without permission. Revelation 13:16-17. Rockefeller never intended to fulfill prophecy. But the globalization logic he created, centralized production, controlled supply chains, concentrated ownership, paved the road toward a world where economic independence becomes increasingly rare. And as these systems grow tighter, ordinary people become more vulnerable. That is why this message is not just historical. It's practical and spiritual. In a world governed by massive corporations and global regulators, believers must cultivate autonomy by land and rural areas, away from the economic machinery of megacities. Dig your own well so you are not dependent on fragile water grids. Invest in generators or solar power, reducing vulnerability to centralized energy systems. Grow food, even on a small scale, so you are not fully reliant on global supply chains. These steps echo biblical wisdom. The prudent man foresees the evil and hides himself. Proverbs 22-3. Rockefeller built a structure of power that survives government action and public outrage. Our generation must build a structure of resilience that survives the global system emerging before our eyes. Even though Rockefeller died in 1937, the system he engineered only grew more powerful after him. Standard Oil's fragments continued to merge, evolve, and rebrand until they once again dominated global energy. But oil wasn't even the greatest legacy he left behind. The real inheritance was the corporate method. And this method has now infiltrated every modern industry. Amazon uses Rockefeller's strategy almost line for line. What began as an online bookstore now controls entire logistical ecosystems. Warehouses, transportation fleets, delivery networks, cloud infrastructure, payment processing, the very servers that host their competitors' websites. This is vertical integration on a scale Rockefeller could only dream of. Amazon doesn't merely participate in the market, it owns the pathway by which goods travel to the consumer. Horizontal dominance. When Amazon can't buy a competitor, it simply copies their products using internal data and pushes its own version to the top of search results. This is a digital version of Rockefeller's price war, legal on paper, lethal in practice. Google Alphabet. Google follows Rockefeller's trust model. Alphabet acts as the parent organization, controlling dozens of independent companies, YouTube, Waymo, DeepMind, and more. Each entity appears separate, but all are governed from a single center of command. This holding structure shields the parent company from risk, spreads influence across multiple sectors, complicates any government attempt at regulation, ensures dominance continues even under scrutiny. It is the same logic Rockefeller pioneered in 1882, simply upgraded for the digital age. Pharmaceutical companies. Rockefeller did not merely dominate markets. He influenced the rules that governed them. In the same way, pharmaceutical giants today help shape medical standards, fund regulators, and influence legislation. They lobby for patent extensions, draft regulatory frameworks, and finance medical research in ways that favor their own models. This is not conspiracy, it is the continuation of Rockefeller's philosophy. Control the regulators, you control the market. The banking world. Major banks operate through complex holding company structures modeled directly after Rockefeller's trust system. JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Citigroup function as sprawling webs of subsidiaries under a central authority. When laws like Dodd-Frank attempt to regulate them, the structure makes oversight nearly impossible. Rockefeller solved this puzzle over a century ago. Modern finance simply adopted and perfected philanthropy as influence. Rockefeller's final innovation was his philanthropic empire. Through foundations, he gained influence over education, medicine, science, and public policy, all while reducing tax burdens and shaping cultural priorities. Today, every billionaire follows the pattern. Gates Foundation, Chan Zuckerberg. Initiative Buffett contributions, hundreds of global NGOs functioning as unelected power centers. These foundations are portrayed as benevolent, yet they reshape nations, rewrite policies, and influence health, education, and economics worldwide, all side democratic oversight. This is precisely what the Bible warns us about, an emerging world system where power is centralized, unelected, and global. Revelation 13 does not describe merely a political leader, but an entire structure in which authority is consolidated and economic participation depends on compliance. Rockefeller's system was a prototype. The modern global order is its near-complete version. And this growing centralization is precisely why Christians today must become intentional about reducing dependence on global systems. Own rural property, away from the grid of centralized control. Have independent water sources, such as wells or natural springs. Use generators or solar panels, ensuring energy resilience. Cultivate food, breaking partial reliance on corporate food chains. These are not fear-driven actions, they are wisdom-driven. Just as Joseph prepared during the 7 years of abundance, believers today must prepare for an era of unprecedented centralization. Globalization promises efficiency, but it also creates vulnerability. And Scripture tells us a day will come when participation in the world economy will be conditional. Better to prepare now than to panic later.